All right, so with this class, I'm going to talk how money is brought into the circulation of the economy, and it's going to be very helpful understanding this, especially if you play the bond market or if you play forex, and you you have to compare the dollar index compared to the S&P 500 or whatever kind of trading you do. But it's just really knowledgeable stuff to know. So because I like history so much, kind of like JJ Gorilla, um, like the best way to describe this part of the course is a quote that Winston Churchill said. He said, "The farther you look back, the farther forward you can see." Right, and without understanding the past, you cannot see into the future. Right, we know that we typically in life, whether it's music, kids, clothing, whatever, wars, we tend to take the same cycle that we did in the past, right? So we need to learn from our mistakes from the past so we don't repeat them in the future. So understanding the monetary system, when the interest rates cycle is, understanding the birth of currency in your pocket, this all can provide a perspective for your plan going forward, right? And most people really don't even understand how money comes into circulation or inflation, deficit spending, taxes, the Federal Reserves, the Treasury, how much money they can make. Is there a fixed amount? Who's the authorizing person who says yes and no? And this is important stuff for us to know. It's our dollar. So we should probably sign a petition bringing Schoolhouse Rock back into the education system. I'm just kidding. Hey, so we're going to move on to step one, right? So the government creates a glorified IOU, and that IOU is known as nothing but a bond. But why, right? The reason is politicians, right? Politicians make promise while they're campaigning to please their voters so that they can get voted into office, right? However, these promises that they make don't come with the money. So to come good on these promises, once they get in the office, they need to increase the money supply and the circulation. So as this politician is making promises to get elected, or while he's in office, or while he's trying to get reelected to please his constituents, right? He creates more money supply in the circulation, and that money supply increases the value of the increases, but the value of the dollar drops. So what do? We print more money, right? And then we create deficit spending. And when you're a teenager, when you first started working, or whether you taught your kids this, we know that deficit spending is spending more money than you are bringing in. So that's essentially what's happening at this level of the government. And this is why credit is so popular nowadays, because deficit spending is popular everywhere you look. All right, so the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond, right? And this is nothing more than the national debt that is paid by us taxpayers. And here's how. So these bonds have a principal, they have fees, and they have interest. And the government's not going to pay that. So the Treasury holds a bond auction, right? And so after the Treasury issues the bond and they hold the bond auction, right? And they invite all the largest banks out there, right? And the banks are trying to get the bonds because they know that they will profit by the earned interest off of the bond, aka the national debt. Why? Because us as the taxpayers are paying for that interest. So now the lucky bank that won over the bond will now swap the bond, the IOU, to create currency, right? So they do this through an open market auction, right? And all the open market auction is when the bank sells some of the bonds to back to the Federal Reserves for a profit. And now is where the magic happens. And so the Federal Reserve gets the bond, and they just out of thin air from a zero balance account, the Federal Reserve will write a check, put in that bond, that currency, into the circulation, which leads to the currency that was made out of nowhere to decrease the dollar in value. So if you look it up, like if me as a typical taxpayer writes a check for money that I don't have in my account, or let's say I open up a bank account, I put no money in it, and then I start writing checks, I'll get thrown in jail for that. But that's essentially what's happening. So essentially, what is happening is that the Treasury is just exchanging that IOU to the Federal Reserve, using the bankers as a middleman to create that currency, allowing the bankers to collect the open interest of that bond. So remember, step one: politicians make promises they can't pay for. So the Treasury creates the IOU, aka bond. The Treasury then holds a bond auction to the large banks who want it because of the open interest. The banks swap the bond through the open market back to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve writes a check from a zero balance account, and the currency is made out of thin air. And now politicians have the money that come through on those promises, aka welfare, roads, whatever, to make it happen. And that is all.